good morning, one and all, and welcome to another very exciting edition of Live at the Waterhole. This morning, coming to you from Jamala in the beautiful Madikwe Game Reserve. And how stunning is this? Couple of ellies, big group of wildebeest, everybody just enjoying a lovely slow start to the morning. So my name is Liam Burrow. I'm the very, very lucky naturalist that gets to talk you through a bit of activity by the Waterhole on this fantastic Saturday morning. What a pleasure. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, I'd love to remind you that we do enjoy keeping this program as interactive as possible. So please keep those questions of yours coming throughout the show. If you haven't already, please head to our website and subscribe there. It's a nice direct way of getting those questions through to us. And it might be nice as well, if you like, to head to YouTube and subscribe there for nice notifications. Beautiful. My goodness, that is a large elephant cow off on the right there. She's a big girl. And a couple of youngsters as well. Superb. Yeah, as we know, water in Africa is life. So spending time next to the water will almost certainly guarantee you sightings of pretty much everything out there, as everything has to drink at some stage. Super. Well, as we begin to kick this morning off with a couple of lovely ellies, let's check in to what our various locations have in store for us in terms of the weather. Well, it looks like pretty pleasant conditions at all of our various locations, fairly typical of this sort of late dry season time of the year. And we have about a month left of true winter. But yeah, for much of the wildlife, things are pretty challenging out there. And while there is water available, and one of the biggest difficulties facing the wildlife is finding enough food in the bush, which is really dried out. Nature is constantly testing its inhabitants. But ultimately, for the theory of survival of the fittest, that's all pretty natural, all pretty good. I can't get over the size of this elephant cow. She is super stocky. Our low-felt elephant females aren't really built like that. I actually initially thought this was a bull. It's such a bulky individual, but it is definitely a cow. And the presence of those younger individuals confirms it as well. But the big giveaway is that almost right angle that's formed on her forehead there. Cows have those very, very angular skulls. Bulls more typically quite rounded. And wonderful to see quite a few wildebeest coming down as well. I've been spending most of my time lately in places like the Sabi Sand, Djuma, and Pridelands outside the town of Hoedspruit. We don't see an awful lot of rather wildebeest in those locations. So yeah, a pleasure to be checking out a few here in Madikwe this morning. It's not that there's anything wrong with those environments, the Sabi Sand or Pridelands. They just don't really offer the conditions that wildebeest find most favorable. They're ultimately species that prefer to be out on the open plains. And while the Sabi Sand and Pridelands do have plains sections, they're more dominated by wooded savanna. I believe this Madikwe area a much more attractive habitat for the wildebeest. Calvin, thanks very much for your question this morning. It is quite possible that this female is pregnant. However, when she did turn past the camera a couple of moments ago, I had a look at her breasts between the front legs, and there was absolutely no milk to be seen there. So if she is pregnant, it isn't close. Again, it's pretty tough to tell. Elephants have enormous gestation periods, the longest of any animal on land, a staggering 22 months. So it's very, very possible that she's in the beginning stages there, or possibly not pregnant at all. Elephant cows are baby-making machines, though, and they'll breed probably for the first time around the age of maybe 12 or 14, and she'll be having babies right up until the end of her life, possibly somewhere around her 50s. She'll still be producing calves. Ellie's getting on the move there. Perhaps time to head into the bush now that they're nice and hydrated to go and find enough vegetation to survive. It is a full-time job sustaining a body that big. Quite a large group of wildebeest there. Their dynamics are quite interesting. Bulls are territorial, so they hold the rights to a sort of specific patch of territory, perhaps with a waterhole, a nice area to graze in. But then groups of cows are actually fairly transient, and they will choose a bull based on the territory that he owns. So in some of these environments, you find a male sort of off all on his own. He might be retired, sort of a bull towards the end of his life, or a bull that simply wasn't fit enough to kind of dethrone other males. Another Ellie popping in over there, grazing out in the open, very, very nice. And a couple of young wildebeest sort of off there, just kind of by the fallen log in the top left corner. Not tiny youngsters, they're probably 6 or 8 months old. Wildebeest breed in the rainy season. And again, we won't really be seeing any rain until the end of this year. Our Ellies don't seem to be in any great hurry to go anywhere. Just enjoying a bit of sun. I believe it's a little bit frosty in Madikwe still. I think it was only about 20 degrees Celsius. Frosty by our African standards. That's a pretty nice warm day in parts of Europe or parts of North America. What a serene morning scene. Spending time with elephants in particular is something I've found over the last 12 or 13 years of safari guiding to be an extremely relaxing thing. I absolutely love them. Whoop, bit of a fright there. Those wildebeest can be a little bit flighty, and that was certainly enough to make that big elephant cow jump. Oh, even some sparring between a couple of those male wildebeest there. Again, that's all about establishing dominance in areas where you do have sufficient wildebeest densities to have a number of bachelors together. It becomes quite testosterone fueled. Lots of jousting and sparring as they try and figure out where they fit in the hierarchy. So lovely to have our illies just marching off towards the horizon through that open patch. Have you ever seen anything more African in all your life? And judging by all the droppings around this waterhole, this is also a pretty big meeting point for elephants. We may well get more and more arriving as the day progresses. Our wildebeest down here in southern Africa are very, very similar to the subspecies that occurs in East Africa, Kenya, Tanzania. That is sort of the location of that very well-known Great Migration that features so much in nature documentaries, the likes of National Geographic and the BBC, often spending time up there. The migration is actually taking place in East Africa as we speak, with many of those wildebeest in parts of the Mara. It's essentially a circuit that takes them across tens of thousands of miles and across two countries. It's sort of eternal. They're constantly following the rain and the good grazing. But one of the great wildlife spectacles on offer on this planet. And some of the greatest congregations of large herbivores on Earth. Something like 1.8 million wildebeest, 350,000 zebra. That has to be seen to be believed. Our wildebeest in southern Africa don't migrate. and they will sort of move a little bit locally if possible. But in spite of us having a couple of very, very large reserves in southern Africa, they simply don't have the ability to move like they once did. There are now cities, tar roads, border fences, all stopping them from covering those thousands of miles. So time, I think, speaking of East Africa, to check in at the Waterhole at Old Donyo. Check it out. Another very, very nice elephant. And quite a supremely impressive pair of tusks here. The bulls in this particular part of the world are thought to be some of the most impressive in Africa. Seriously big ellies. Check him out. Not a particularly old bull. I put this guy at about 30 or 35 years of age. Really only just coming into his prime. And the growth of these tusks will only accelerate in the last sort of 10 or 15 years of his life. Getting thicker and significantly longer, I'm sure. After spotting a very, very large elephant bull by the name of Iselwini on a recent WildEarth stint at Pridelands, outside the town of Hoedspruit, one of WildEarth's locations, somebody who works at Old Donyo actually reached out to me after I posted the video on Instagram. This Old Donyo property is somewhere I've absolutely always wanted to go. Specifically to come and see these enormous elephant bulls. So perhaps a visit is due at some stage. Bucket list stuff. Beautiful big bull. I don't know if it is just genetics or perhaps the incredible mineral content of the soil, extra magnesium, phosphorus, the stuff left in the soil by millions and millions of years of volcanic activity. But for whatever reason, these parts of East Africa just produce incredible specimens. The biggest of buffalo, the biggest kudu, some of the biggest rhino, and of course, outrageously large elephants. A very, very, very special part of the world. This guy isn't doing too much drinking. I don't actually know what he's up to there. Just sort of squishing the tip of his trunk into the mud. I don't know, maybe he's finishing up here. Looks like that trunk tip is pretty wet. Oh, check it out. Zebra coming in as well. Yeah, I think this guy may have drunk quite a bit of water already before we even got here. Just seeing the tip of that zebra's nose there. He seems to be quite comfortable sharing this tiny pan with these beautiful East African zebs. looks like some emerald spotted wood doves coming down as well. Goodness me, and umbrella thorn tree in the background there, Acacia tortilis. How's that for an African scene? Like a postcard. Roshan, I could not have said it better myself. A beautiful beast. This actually doesn't look real. The low angle at this pan is extremely cool. Makes us feel like we're sat right there. Looks like quite a big herd of zebra. Let's see, 5 or 6 at least. I wonder if this Ellie is gonna push them away when he's finished drinking. Seems like quite a relaxed chap. These plain zebra found in East Africa, in my opinion, are some of the prettiest in Africa. They're so clean looking. Now they don't have the shadow stripe, so that kind of brown stripe in the middle of the white bars on their bodies that we see in zebra in kind of the Greater Kruger, Madikwe, down in the Cape. They are just so fresh looking. The bands on the rump are also significantly narrower. Sure, it is a large group of these zebs. They are glorious. Things like zebra and wildebeest tend to be quite nervous around the water's edge, and they are essentially quite vulnerable when they dip their heads down to have a drink. And these water points are the perfect place for a lion to hide. Lions rely on the fact that pretty much everything has to drink all of their prey species. So it's often worth finding a shady spot near to the water, a little bit out of view. Oh, big giraffe coming in as well. And playing a waiting game. Goodness me, what a scene. You might just believe you're in Africa. That looks to me to be a female giraffe. Oh, 2. Couple of zebs still around. It's a pretty small pan though. I see these zebras sort of pushing off, and perhaps the giraffe even waiting for this large Ellie to make a bit of room. A giraffe in particular are very, very nervous around the water's edge. Essentially, when they drop that head down and spread those front legs, if a lion or something was to run up and grab them, it would be pretty much game over. So they tend to be, I'd say, even more vigilant than things like the zebra. And certainly even sitting with guests trying to get that iconic photo of a giraffe spread-legged sipping from the water. If a single person on the car coughs or sneezes or something like that, often it stops the giraffe. Very, very nervous. does look like our Ellie Bull is slowly finishing up here at the Waterhole. I think he's certainly done with drinking. He just seems to be relaxing here. But with a body that weighs 6 tons and is at least 4 meters long, he's taking up a lot of room at this little pan. He might even be consuming a little bit of that mud that is sort of at the water's edge there. It's well documented that elephants do practice geophagia, the consumption of soil, often to deal with toxins in some of the plants that they feed on. Interesting behavior to catch on video, though. Goodness me, isn't that a peaceful scene this morning? As I said earlier, seeing happy, healthy Ellies just going about their business just relaxes me on another level. It's a bit like watching a crackling campfire or the sea. Still a couple of zebra around here. Again, this big tusked elephant bull might be preventing a couple of them from having their morning drink. I have a feeling there'll be a bit more activity around here when he eventually pushes off. Not that he's being particularly grumpy or aggressive. I've viewed Ellies on a couple of occasions driving herds away from the waterhole. They seem to just want it all for themselves. And while you might have been told that the lion is the king, ultimately the elephant would beg to differ. There is not much out here that could challenge a big guy like this. Resting his trunk on the ground, sort of lifting that front foot, you might even be listening to a low-frequency communication from other Ellies nearby. Perhaps checking in with an old friend to start his day as well. Totally serene. I'm hopeful at some stage to get a view of One Ton, another famous elephant bull in this area. And I believe from time to time he does frequent this pan. Picasso, certainly it does. So flapping the ears backwards against the body encourages that air in that gap to rush quite violently upwards, downwards, and backwards over essentially what is the thinnest skin on their bodies. Skin on their backs, skin on their sides, possibly about an inch thick, but on the back of their ears, possibly only a millimeter or two. It's also got a vast network of blood vessels in those ears specifically, through which the elephant's entire 450 liters of blood will pass in about 20 minutes under immense pressure. So a little bit of flapping on a hot day, and it just encourages that blood to radiate a huge amount of heat. Elephants don't produce sweat, so their skin can be quite dry. So they have evolved to do this ear flapping and air radiating. A lot of people on safari are quite daunted when viewing elephants close and the ears do start flapping. I think many people interpret that as aggression. And absolutely, an ellie can use its ears to indicate elements of its emotional state when it is getting a bit upset. But you've got to kind of take a bunch of different things into account. Look at what the elephant's doing with its head. What's it doing with its trunk? Is the tail quite relaxed? As this guy stands now, totally calm. Oh, and here comes the giraffe. Surrounded by flocks of what look like turtle doves. That's really a proper dry season scene. I'll be interested to see if this giraffe is willing to squat right next to this elephant. I think it might. Gazelle coming in the back there. I think that might be a Grant's gazelle, but hopefully it gets a bit closer and we can see. Not to be confused with the springbok that we would see at Okakoyo. They do both have that brown stripe. They've got the little pointy black horns, but they are very different animals. Ha! And there's our magnificent Maasai giraffe having a drink there. Beaut. Yeah, it looks a bit ungainly when a giraffe does do this. Those front legs must be under quite a bit of stress, supporting all of that body, that whole center of gravity tipping forward like that. Cool. Always a nice thing to catch on camera. Giraffe are remarkably independent of water. Just a quick sip. I don't know, maybe he'll go in and do that again. Possibly got a bit of a fright from that cow coming in from behind. But yeah, these giraffes are remarkably independent of water in some areas. In the drier parts of southern Africa, giraffe are only potentially drinking every 7 or 8 days. However, if water is available, they'll happily take it. Haha, and then there were 3, plus our Ellie. Yeah, I did say at the beginning of the show, water is life. It will attract wildlife in from all over the place, and in great diversity as well. There he goes again. This is just superb this morning. Whoa! 5 that we can see. Everybody very patiently waiting their turn in the queue. Again, that ties into the fact that these giraffes are so vulnerable. It pays to have lots of eyes looking out while one is sort of in that precarious position, that forward squat. Everybody keeping an eye out for the presence of things like lions. Ha! And zebra as well. Yeah, this doesn't even look real. It's just so perfect. I think that guy was perhaps a little bit too nervous, a bit too close to that eddy. Come on, big bull, you're taking up a lot of space here, as nice as it is to check you out. Give everybody else a chance. And off they pop. Wonderful to get a glimpse at them bolting a little bit there. They've got this really unusual gait, the way they walk, and that giraffe specifically. They sort of walk like a camel, but when they take off, they run like a horse. That led to some of the early sort of Cape Dutch explorers landing on South Africa, spotting these giraffes as some of the first Europeans to have ever seen them. And that led them to believe that the giraffe might be some sort of hybrid between a camel and a horse. And they could not have been more wrong, though. It might walk like a camel, but it is not a cameloid at all. In actual fact, the only other relative of the giraffe out in the wild is something called an okapi. Really, really interesting, much shorter looking. It's got a stripy rump, very brown back. And they live around the equator in Africa, in places like the Congo, in the rainforest. Our zebra and giraffe definitely keen to come in and get their share of water here, but perhaps choosing to give this big elephant bull a bit of room. I don't know, he looks like a pretty relaxed chap to me, but maybe they don't quite see it that way. He's a lot bigger than they are. I cannot get over how pretty these zebra are. They are stunning. Debbie, an excellent question and a dilemma that I've been faced with on a number of occasions, operating walking safaris in the wilderness areas that I've guided in over the last 12 or 13 odd years. Look, so it's fairly circumstantial, as I mentioned, and it kind of depends on the particular elephant that you are being charged by. If it happens to be a matriarch, a big adult female from a breeding herd, that is going to be very, very bad news. In my opinion, cows can be a lot more dangerous than the bulls. So, if at all possible, while it might not be the easiest, you probably should be thinking about trying to run for your life. Certainly getting into a deep drainage line behind a big fallen log, something like that. But bulls, a lot of the time, the right thing to do is to stand still, hold your ground. If you're carrying a rifle or a water bottle or something like that, holding it in your hand, holding it high above your head, and doing your level best to at least give that elephant bull the impression that you are confident and that you're not afraid. A whole lot easier said than done, though. But yeah, in general, in my dealings with Ellies over the last sort of little over a decade, remaining calm is one of the biggest priorities. I've always said that elephants get a great deal of information from the sound of your voice. So shouting and clapping your hands and things like that, possibly not the best way to go about things. I'm a firm believer that with a calm tone of voice, you can actually talk your way out of a lot of confrontations with elephant. But yeah, I would far rather be confronted by a 6 or 7 ton bull, even at very close quarters, than an elephant cow. The cows can be ferocious, and it comes from being very defensive mothers. They do, after all, make some of the finest animal mums out there. They will run to the ends of the earth to protect their calves. And after a 22-month gestation period, you can understand them being very committed to that baby. One zebra taking the plunge here. And this Ellie bull couldn't care less, happily going about his business as well. I wonder if this won't give the message to the rest of the zebra that it's all clear and they're welcome to come in. And they are, after all, herd animals. Looks like we might have an oryx coming in the background as well. Sure, there is some proper diversity here this morning. Again, this is a Bisa oryx, quite different to the southern oryx that we'd see in the more arid regions in southern Africa, even around places like Okakoyo. Genetically, they're pretty close, and they are biological cousins, but in terms of their distribution, about 4,000 kilometers separates the two populations. They are some of the most attractive antelope out here. I love their masks and their stripy legs. With some luck, he'll come a little closer into view and give us a good look at his markings. Ha! Cheeky thing. That little flick of his horns was a direct threat to those giraffe. And even though they're two different species, it translated immediately. He could possibly do a lot of damage with that sharp set of horns, probably 3 foot long on either side. And the giraffe know that. Going down on his haunches, that's great. Oh, just a very quick sip there. Again, tying into that theme that a lot of these herbivores are very, very nervous around the water. And his little sort of fright and charge off in the other direction also spooked those giraffe. But I don't think he had enough. I think he wants to come back. These oryx are true masters of arid areas, capable of withstanding unbelievable temperatures in excess of 45 degrees Celsius in the baking sun. And they radiate blood into their nostrils and up into those enormous horns, bringing it very, very close to the surface and assisting them to cool down. They can also go quite extended periods without water if they have to. In some areas, oryx live totally independent of water. They don't drink at all. Goodness me, things are hotting up here. We have 4 different species in one frame. Like something straight out of The Lion King. These Burchell zebra in East Africa, again, are just too gorgeous for words. Our oryx seems to be finished up. He's on his missions now. But the zebra in particular almost look painted. They're so fresh, so clean looking. And in one frame, 3 of the most requested species in terms of things guests want to see on a safari. 3 of my favorites for sure. Some of the most photogenic residents of the African bush. Cool. Well, I think now time to check in at another one of our cameras. Let's head over to Tau to see what's happening there. Ho ho! How's this for a scene? So, two rather large-looking crocodiles here at Tau in Madikwe, basking on the opposite bank. Conditions in South Africa's northwest at the moment have been very, very chilly, particularly at night, with temperatures dropping well into the single digits. So for something ectothermic, in layman's terms, cold-blooded, and those are awfully challenging conditions. Knob-billed coot there, just passing a white-faced whistling duck. Egyptian goose, I believe. Yeah, Egyptian goose is that bigger bird. And behind the crocodile on the left there, I think we've even got an African spoonbill. So quite a bit of activity going on here in the absence of any movement from our crocodilians. Again, these are Nile crocodiles, and the largest crocodilian in Africa. Some of them can get well over a ton and about 18 feet in length, 6 meters. Of all the things we deal with out in the bush as guides or naturalists, the crocodile is the thing that makes me feel the most afraid. My worst waking nightmare is finding myself in deep water with a large crocodile. Once one of these guys has grabbed hold of you, there is very, very little that you can do to actually get away. They reckon if you are grabbed by a crocodile, basically your only line of defense is to reach inside its jaws and break the seal that's formed at the back of its mouth by a piece of tissue called the gullar flap. It's basically a kind of a split piece of tissue that gives the crocodile the ability to close its throat so that it doesn't swallow water when it bites something underneath the surface. So if you can break that flap, croc will slow, or rather swallow a whole bunch of water, and it'll be forced to rise to the surface. But a whole lot easier said than done when a 1-ton reptile with a mouth full of teeth is chomping onto your leg and potentially doing a roll in the water to try and break one of your appendages off. So the theory is good, but in practice might not be so easy to achieve. I think your best bet is just to stay out of water in Africa. They're also a bit frightening because even a 15, 16 odd foot crocodile can hide in about half a meter, a foot and a half of dirty water. So even if you're down at the water's edge, possibly washing dishes, collecting a sip of drinking water, something like that, it doesn't take the deepest pool to hide a true man-eating crocodile. Now, they're also one of the only animals on the planet that naturally registers humans as a food source. A croc sees you and me walking along a riverbank, and it starts to size us up. Even something like a lion or a wolf or a bear, they look at people and they're instinctively quite afraid of us. A croc, not so. Lenny, apparently not. So I've always found that a bit silly. I've perhaps not understood it properly. Egyptian geese are apparently ducks. They're some of the biggest ducks in Africa, but they do an awful lot of hissing. So I wonder if taxonomically they're not in more of a gap between ducks and geese. They certainly look like a goose to me. They've got lots of characteristics of a domestic goose, not to mention they're so aggressive, which is a trait you you expect from geese rather than ducks. But yeah, they are apparently more duck-like. Truth be told, I'm not an expert right there though. I don't know what the specific details are that split the two families, but a great question. Thanks for that. As ornithologists or people who study birds kind of go deeper into the studies of the thousands of species of birds that occur on our planet, and they're finding more and more sort of evidence to split families that we thought were originally quite closely related. Um, Big improvements have been made in the studies of DNA and the sampling of DNA over the last sort of 30, 40 years, leading to a lot of that differentiation. So this is another very, very nice scene. I'm trying to estimate how big those crocs are. I'd reckon about 3 meters each, 9 or 10 foot. Pretty impressive, nothing to be scoffed at. I worked with a guide in Olifantswest a number of years ago, a region outside our reserve outside the town of Hoedspruit in South Africa's northeast. And he used to say, when looking at a crocodile that was whatever, only a meter or a meter and a half long, not the biggest, but if it grabbed you by the foot, it would be enough to ruin your day. Always made me chuckle. True story. I don't want to paint them in too much of a nasty light, though. They are predatory. They do kill things. They do have the potential to be a bit menacing. But essentially, they're just doing what crocodiles are designed to do, and what the last 500 million years of evolution has prepared them for. They're quite literally living dinosaurs. But when they reproduce, they do have a surprisingly tender side. On 2 or 3 occasions in the last decade or so, I've been fortunate enough to witness crocodile courtship, which is surprisingly gentle. Crocodiles mate in the water, and the male will swim up alongside the female, blowing an absolute cloud of bubbles fairly relentlessly around her face, and sort of gently informing her that he's interested in mating. If he is the biggest croc in the area, she'll go ahead and let him do that. And then a couple of weeks later, probably 3 to 4 weeks later, she hauls herself up onto the bank to a point where she's sure that if there is flooding, rising water levels won't destroy the nest. She then digs about half a meter into the soil with her back feet and deposits up to 60 hard-shelled eggs into the hole. She'll then protect them from predators, sitting nearby, keeping an eye out for predatory birds, monitor lizards, mongoose, monkeys, baboons, until those eggs hatch about 90 to 100 days later, at which time she will carry every single individual hatchling extremely gently in those powerful jaws down to the water. And then for a number of weeks after those youngsters have hatched, she carries them on her back. She'll defend them, protect them. Not perhaps something you were expecting from something that we often regard as a cold-blooded killer. So there's always another side to the story. It's not always cut and dried. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't recommend a swim in this particular waterhole. And exercise extreme caution if you are ever spending time around the water in Africa, fishing, doing water sports, anything like that. They can sneak up almost out of nowhere. Not too much hunting going on for our crocs today, though. Again, being ectothermic, these guys require quite a bit of time spent on land, soaking up energy from the sun and utilizing that to sort of increase their metabolism. Without that sun, they've just got no power at all. Both of these guys look pretty well fed to me, lovely round bellies. Cool, well, as we leave these large lounging reptiles, let's check in at Rosie's pan to see what's happening there this morning. Haha, more elephant magic. Now this is a pretty special location for me. I actually guided in Olifantswest for about 2.5 years, right at the beginning of my career. So I have been to Rosie's Pan in person probably hundreds of times and seen some pretty amazing things around the water here. Now the ellies in particular in this part of the world are magical. And this is where I first met Ezelwini, that enormous tusker. We also had regular sightings around this waterhole of an incredible male leopard by the name of TSM, a 3-spot male. Just beyond that dam wall, I witnessed him snatching a newborn baby buffalo out of the middle of a breeding herd and jumping into a tree with it, still alive. So this is a real wilderness. It's an amazing area. This chap very obligingly turning into the camera as he's drinking there. What a performer. Looks like he might be finishing up though. A young bachelor bull, probably mid-20s. gently sniffing the ground there. He's got a sense of smell tens of thousands of times stronger than the best sort of anti-drug sniffing dog. He's possibly scenting another elephant that's moved through this area, maybe another individual that he knows. Nice and close to the camera there. Still having a bit of a drink. Again, elephants are particularly fussy drinkers, and they tend not to drink dirty water at all. If all they can find is dirty water, they'll often splash it on their backs, but they won't actually drink. And coming up to a pan like Rosie's, he'll sort of skim the surface. Dirt and sediment and stuff tends to settle onto the bottom, leaving all the lovely, fresh, clear stuff at the surface. Skimming for the very best stuff, and there's a nice drink of it. They can pull a staggering amount of water up into that trunk, probably about 5 odd litres at a time for an average sized ellie, under immense pressure, and then blast it into their mouth at something like 30 times the pressure exerted by a human sneeze. Very efficient stuff. The trunk is essentially a nose though, so he can't drink through the trunk like a straw, as the Disney movies would have you believe. Think of trying to drink a glass of water with your nose. It would be going one way, and that's into your lungs. Still scenting away there. He's definitely checking for the presence of something, maybe even a predator. Now, Rosie's pan is the only body of water in this section, so it attracts life from all around. Lions, leopards, the wild dogs, hyena will all come through here at times. And my guiding experience in this area was one of the best of my career. I had a blast out there. It's very arid part of the world, quite dry at times, very rocky, but the diversity, the quality of sightings and the low vehicle density made it an incredible experience. And of course, lots of elephants, which makes me very, very happy indeed. Quite a bit of algae growing on the water here. That's that green sort of floaty stuff there. It tends to happen where water becomes a bit stagnant, especially if there's a bit of animal dung in it as well. But this is still a nice fresh body of water. It is pumped via a borehole from hundreds of meters below the surface, providing a source of life-giving water throughout the toughest times of the year. Not quite ready to go yet. Giving that little head shake there. I wonder if there aren't a couple more Ellies around. That was definitely directed at somebody. These savanna elephants in the Greater Kruger totally dependent on water. They have to have access to it at least once a day, probably twice, and in massive quantities. Over 200 litres for a big fully grown 6 or 7 ton male. Again, quite skillfully skimming the surface there, avoiding any of that algae. He only wants the proper, freshest, clearest stuff right up at the top before he heads off into this scrub to go and find something to eat. Probably the inner bark of some of the knobthorn and marula trees at this time of year. There isn't much grass left to graze. And off he heads. I love how silent these guys are when they move. You can't hear a single footstep. It's only when he snaps a branch or perhaps blows some air out of his trunk that you really hear anything. Or air out of the the other end, as the case would be. He snapped a branch off of a weeping wattle tree there. Not the most palatable bush. Certainly the vegetation, the leaf material is pretty bitter and pretty undigestible for an ellie, but the bark seems to be quite tasty. So they snap these sort of saplings off, run the branch through their back teeth, through their 4 enormous molars, and very, very skillfully, almost mechanically, strip all that bark off. Just slowly disappearing from view there. Sean, good morning from the UK there. A very, very good question. So ellie eyesight is not all that wonderful, and they can see fairly good detail at close range, but further than about 50 or 60 meters, if you as a human were stood in the bush, even stood in fairly plain sight, provided you weren't moving, and an elephant is likely to go straight by. But they have extremely, extremely good vision, and again, a sense of smell about 4,000 times better than the finest tracking dogs. So, if the wind is not in your favor, or if you snapped a little twig or something, that elephant would be very much aware of your presence. I had an experience on a walking safari at very close quarters with a couple of elephant bulls that were not aware of our presence, with a couple of guests. We sort of set it all up perfectly. The wind was in our favor, briefed everybody that they had to be completely quiet, and then a lady's Apple Watch went off and she couldn't silence it. So, yeah, technology almost killing us there. It certainly got the Ellies very, very upset. We had to talk our way out of a bit of a confrontation there. But thankfully, no harm done, and a lesson learned. You've got to do more than just silence your phones on a walking safari. So otherwise, not a whole lot going on at Rosie's Pan for now. But I'm sure through the day this will continue to attract various species. This Olifants West area is home to an enormous diversity of animals. And of course, in the absence of large, heavy-bodied species, you very often have the birds. The majority of the bird calls you are hearing now are produced by a beautiful, beautiful finch-like species, a tiny thing, probably only stands about 2.5 or 3 inches tall. They're called the blue waxbill. You can see them sort of fluttering down to the shallows there. Also the white undersides of the wings of some emerald-spotted wood doves, another species that absolutely thrives in this very arid, dried-out red bush willow woodland. Cool. Well, with things getting a little quiet here at Rosie's Pan, might be nice to check back in at Old Donyo. A whole lot more oryx coming in there. A couple of zebs too. And of course our big bull Ellie from earlier. Doesn't look like he's moved much at all. Very, very keen to see these oryx standing a little bit more still. Hopefully they come to the edge and share the water with this big old bull. I say old again, this guy is not the oldest of Ellie bulls, probably somewhere between 30 and 35. A gazelle moving past in the background there again. I think these are Gerard's gazelle, but they'd have to be a bit closer for us to tell for sure. This is a towering male elephant. Arguably 3.5 meters tall at the point of that shoulder. Like a mountain. There is not a whole lot out here that'll challenge him. Other than a slightly larger elephant bull. Oh, he's moving off there. Possibly to chase our oryx. That tail, a very effective fly swatter. It's covered in very, very bristly hairs. Hairs well over 3 or 4 millimeters thick. They're enormous. Oh, and reversing back onto screen. A wonderful frontal view of this guy. It is thirsty work being this big. Such an epic perspective to be looking at him head on like this as he comes in for his morning drink. That head is probably 3 foot wide. He's a colossus. And again, the heaviest mammal, or the heaviest land animal anywhere on land. About 2 tons larger than the largest Asian elephant. And probably 4 or 5 tons larger than the average white rhino, which is the 3rd largest mammal on land. A couple of giraffe just on the periphery there with our oryx and gazelle. for now, this chap is king of the Waterhole. Ellies often command that respect. Nice as well to listen to a bit of the sound there, and that phenomenal sort of gargling as the trunk impels water and then blasts it out there. Oh, check it out! Another bull with a fairly impressive set of tusks himself. Again, a testament to the genes in this population of eddies. They are marvelous. Still haven't seen the big bull yet, but I'm hopeful that old 1 ton might show up at some stage. Yeah, big boys. I reckon this chap roughly the same sort of age. Oh, and a big eland. Magic. So the eland is the heaviest antelope in Africa, bulls up to about 1 ton, but still able to jump like a kudu, well over 6 foot into the air. Unbelievably agile. This is such a nice scene. And zebs coming in en masse. How's that for diversity? And oryx. This eland bull makes the oryx practically dinky looking. He's bulky. Such a pleasure to see that eland. That's one of my favorite antelope species. And we just don't see a lot of them in the Lowveld where I'm based. I did, however, have an incredible sighting guiding a couple of guests about a year ago on Swalu in South Africa's Northern Cape. We're bumbling along next to a big dune looking for cheetahs. When an eland popped over the top, I was pretty excited. And then a cloud of dust sort of started to rise behind it, and it was followed by about 200 more, like a herd of Cape buffalo. It was incredible. They just went thundering down this dune sort of past us. That is by far the most eland I've ever seen. Oh, giraffe coming in too. It's all happening here this morning. And everybody seems to be sharing quite happily, which is nice. Lane, I have heard reports out of Amboseli, where an incredible group of ladies have been studying elephants for decades, literally since the 60s. And they reckon some of the oldest bulls coming out of there are probably 65 plus, maybe 66, 67. Now, those are pretty exceptional individuals, though. Lots of oryx coming in now. Oh, Zeb's getting a bit skittish. Yeah, the average bull can be expected to live somewhere between about 55 and 65 years of age. Again, all dependent on his dentition, his teeth. Elephants only get 6 sets of molar teeth in their life. And when they've worn through to the final set, and that final set is polished, sort of as smooth as glass, it's got no more grinding ability, that elephant will gradually start to go downhill. It's not that it's going to starve to death in a couple of days, but a bit like elderly people, and they're kind of worn down, their immune systems are a bit weak, and they become susceptible to infections, and they pass away like that. But if you think about it, 65 years, a pretty good innings. Goodness gracious, absolutely everything here. Our eland behind the elephant bull on the right, huge herd of oryx. There's very, very pretty Burchell zebra there, and giraffe all around. This is a real East African scene. That eland is such a massive antelope that a team of sort of startup farmers in Eastern Europe, in Russia, exported them from Africa, imported them into Russia, I believe in the 80s, in an attempt to breed them in captivity as an alternative to beef. Again, an adult bull can weigh as much as a ton, so a hell of a lot of muscle on that frame. But yeah, they don't breed quite as well as cattle. While I think there are still a couple of eland farms in Russia, it never really took off. Oh, the sprinting giraffe definitely gave our bulls a little bit of a fright there. But a wonderful opportunity to check out the vista. Again, everybody quite skittish around the water. This would be the perfect place for a lion to be lurking. We have a huge responsibility to conserve these wilderness areas. so that iconic scenes like this can continue to take place. Sustainable ecotourism is a wonderful way to do so, showing our governments that there is value in wildlife beyond just the hunting industry, which in some cases can be all right, but in a lot of cases can be very destructive. Wherever possible, having vehicles full of tourists taking photos rather than firing bullets can generate a whole lot more money long term for conservation. Protecting entire environments. Hunting certainly has its place in some areas, in areas that are sort of not developed and just don't have the infrastructure to host tourists. But it has to be done extremely ethically by people that understand the function of the environment. No hunting at all takes place in Kenya, and that has been the case for many, many years now. The Kenyan government realized a long time ago that tourism could be one of their greatest incomes, and it has been. Millions upon millions of international visitors flood into Kenya's reserves every year, bringing in tourist dollars and supporting the wildlife into the future. Kenya does face, however, an enormous problem at the moment, which is ivory poaching. Big bulls like these could be quite at risk of being shot illegally for those ivory tusks. A big demand for those tusks coming from places like China and Vietnam, where they're essentially carved into trinkets. As ridiculous as it may seem, chopsticks, bangles, little figurines. Ivory does carve beautifully. It carves like no other substance out there, apparently. But you may be less eager to purchase a little trinket carved out of ivory if you think an elephant had to lose its life to produce it, and that the whole process has potentially left an elephant family traumatized and grieving. So if in your travels you're going to places like Asia, you probably will come across ivory. Don't buy it. If the buying stops, the killing can too. You can also do your bit at home to support the fight against the scourge that is ivory poaching in places like East Africa, by supporting such incredible organizations as the Sheldrick Trust. It's worth a look. They have the most incredible elephant orphanage outside the city of Nairobi, where they deal with the really terrible problem that is all the elephant babies left behind when the adults are shot for their tusks. They have basically written the book on what it takes to raise a baby elephant and return it to the wild. They do some pretty selfless work. Oh, big eland coming in again from the right. Oh, no contest there. He's about 3 times the size of that oryx. And this isn't even a fully grown eland. Starbuck, not necessarily at all, and that is a great question. So elephant bulls are obviously born like elephant females into the structure that is a natal herd, a breeding herd, led by a matriarch and with no permanent male family members. So bulls arrive at puberty, I guess, pretty similarly to humans do, in the sort of early teenage years, maybe somewhere between 12 and about 15 years of age, at which time, when that testosterone starts to kick in, they become quite aggressive and they're very, very boisterous, in particular with smaller calves in the family. And then they start to have a bit of reproductive interest in female family members, which is obviously genetically not a great thing. But the cows snap into gear, the adult females in the herds, and they begin to put pressure on those young males to back off. And basically these females push them further and further back until ultimately the bulls are a couple of miles behind the breeding herd. A time eventually comes where it suits those bulls much better to just hang around with other males. So they form kind of an entire society, all of their own. Often these bachelor herds center around one enormous individual, a big leader, and he's very much a mentor. He teaches the younger males how to be elephants, how to be male elephants. He disciplines them. At times he'll break up fights. He'll teach them where to find the best food, where to find water at challenging times of the year. He'll teach them how to behave around females, which is particularly important. And towards the end of their lives, he might even be telling them about safe places to go and rest and ultimately to die. Elephant society is a society all based around the passage of knowledge and the sharing of elephant knowledge. Now, these big bulls, with their decades of experience, could not be more valuable. Now, we must protect them so that that knowledge can continue to be passed through. It's an elephant's history. A giraffe strutting very elegantly by there. This looks like a female. They do have the most graceful sort of way of moving. It's actually believed that the word giraffe originated from a word in Arabic, the language from the Far East. And that word is zarafa with a Z. And translated from Arabic, that means the one who walks swiftly, which is quite nice. They do have this incredible flow to them. She's just trying to have her chance there at the water. Hopefully these bulls let her do that, but I think they will. And all of a sudden they're on the move. Perhaps not. Just changing positions. You might find that there is not a whole lot of water around on the Saldonio property, hence the presence of so much life. Elephant are so intrinsically linked with the availability of water. I guess they're just in no great hurry to head off. This is a nice place to be for an hour or two this morning. Oh, they are colossal bulls. Big guys. In particular, that chap on the right, he's enormous. That big domed head I was talking about earlier. Again, the cows have quite an angular forehead, like that female we started with at Madikwe this morning. The bulls tend to be much wider, much rounder. Oh, and a big giraffe again. This place is just full of life, and our eland. I hope everybody in the world has the chance, at least once, to visit the wilds of Africa. If you care about wildlife and enjoy spending time with animals, this is one of the best places in the world to do it. And for a lot of people, it's a pretty addictive experience. I've guided many, many guests that just can't stop coming back. They love it. It is the greatest show on earth, and none of it is staged. Essentially, as well, these animals belong to all of us. So we should all get to see them. They're very, very special indeed. Thanks there, Gio. That's an extremely kind comment there. I'm very, very happy to hear you've enjoyed a bit of what I've been saying. I actually walked into a shop the other day to go and purchase something, and this live at the Waterhole was was playing on the TV in the shop. I thought that was quite cool. I think a lot of people seem to do that. It's just nice to have on in the background if you're not watching it directly. But with this much action around the Old Donyo Waterhole this morning, it's difficult to take your eyes off it. This lone eland bull, giving us some phenomenal views as well. And when I was a little kid growing up in central Zimbabwe, my grandfather, who was quite a successful businessman, my late grandpa, bought his first BMW, something he was extremely proud of, and driving it back into the game reserve that we owned, a 1-ton eland bull jumped out in front of him and landed on the car. Very, very lucky it didn't kill him. But yeah, anyway, absolutely trashed the vehicle, and then it ran off into the bush. Bummer! But that's what insurance is for. A bit tough to explain to an insurance broker in the city, though. Not your average catastrophe. Again, eland make phenomenal jumpers in spite of their bulk, 800 to about 1,000 kilos, 2,200 pounds. They can still leap like a kangaroo, 6 or 8 foot into the air, often over electric fences. And the oryx finding their confidence as well, gradually coming in, with this eland not really keen to share with them. There's certainly a pecking order between the species. He's the biggest, at least as far as the antelope go. So he's number one. Those oryx are not to be scoffed at, though. Their horns are extremely long, 3 to 4 foot long, and unbelievably sharp. No coincidence as well that with their head chucked all the way back, the horns reach almost to the rump. So something like a lion jumping onto the back of an oryx takes an enormous risk. It could be impaled. Check those horns out, they are unreal. That Ellie rhythmically flapping his ears a bit there. I think things must be hotting up in East Africa. It is essentially almost midday. This is so special. There must be 60, 70 different animals here. Things certainly getting a bit testy with these oryxes, though. I think everybody getting thirsty, everybody getting grumpy. Oh, bit of contact there. These oryx have the potential to do enormous harm to one another. A well-placed stab with one of those 4-foot horns, that could be quite fatal. But most conflicts are avoided. Somebody will back down. Most animals have a very strong instinct for self-preservation. They don't want to get hurt. Provided they're not equally matched and fighting over females. And then things can get bloody. Again, these are the Biasa oryx, different to the oryx we get in southern Africa. In places like Okakoyo. Oh, a bit more contact there. Clacking of horns and a bit of a grunt. Yeah, there are 2 subspecies of oryx. So fairly distinct, also separated by a few thousand miles. But essentially filling the same ecological niche. This is just sublime. They just keep coming and coming. I think the zebra got in and got out though. Maybe one sort of behind that elephant off on the left, I'm not quite sure. That might also just be a thorn bush. At that distance it's a bit tough to see. But oryx, ellies, eland, giraffe, oh no, there's our zebs. What a wilderness. A very pregnant mare on the left there. She probably won't be dropping her foal until the rains arrive. A zebra seemed to time the arrival of the youngsters pretty perfectly to the arrival of all the lovely green grass, which you need long summer days and lots of rainfall to grow. Another very pregnant mare off on the right there. I'm surprised by how tolerant these ellie bulls are. They haven't really been chasing anybody. They seem to be happy to share the water with everyone. I guess some amount of confidence comes with being so massive. Getting some wonderful demonstrations of relaxed elephant body language there. And that guy on the right, even occasionally crossing his back feet, taking a load off. When viewing elephants in close quarters, especially from a safari vehicle, those are the sort of signs that you want to see. They demonstrate that the area is nice and comfy. Doesn't mean you any harm. An elephant that's also happily swishing his tail, holding his head nice and low, flapping those ears quite calmly, are also all good signs of a calm pachyderm. Now that is a massive giraffe bull. The one just exiting the screen off to the right there. Well over 5 meters tall, 15, 16 odd feet. And that is the tallest mammal on Earth. By a long shot. Sorry, the final control, you guys broke up a little bit. Would you mind sending those comms again? Okay, cool. Well, apparently there's a little bit of activity around the waterhole at Okakoyo in Etosha, Namibia. Let's have a look there. Very, very nice. Some activity to be sure. So top left-hand corner of the screen there, in amongst those chalky white rocks, we've got a large herd of female kudu. And then off on the right, a big group of springbok. Two fairly iconic species for this arid place. Now, Etosha actually means Great White Area, and it refers to the famous salt pan. But I guess you could translate that into this area as well. It almost looks like snow. But it is that very, very chalky rock. At one stage, much of these areas were a lake bed beneath the water, but we're talking millions of years ago. These springbok really are pretty cool little antelope. Again, they look pretty similar to the gazelle that you get in East Africa. but they're pretty different. It's actually quite funny. Their scientific name, Antidorcus marsupialis, translates directly to, well, I'll break it up. Anti is not, Dorcas is gazelle, so not gazelle, and marsupialis, you can hear the word marsupial there. That refers to a funny little pouch that they have on their rump with this little sort of flush of the softest white fur tucked in there. When they perform their iconic springbok pronking display, this jumping sort of back arched thing that they do, that lovely white fur sort of puffs out of there. We're not 100% sure why they do that funny display, but we reckon probably to signal to other springbok that they are healthy, and perhaps even more importantly, to things like predators, that it wouldn't be worth the predator's time to chase that individual because it's so fit, so healthy. That sort of squawking call you can hear in the background as well is a pied crow, one of the scavenging birds that lives in this area. Should one of these springbok be killed by something like a cheetah, a leopard, a lion in this area, if anything is left over, and those pied crows will pick the bones clean. No easy feat for a predator to kill one of these springbok, though. They can run at 88 kilometers an hour, which is about 55 miles per hour. They are pretty slick. Now, the thing is, the springbok has also got endurance on its side. It can keep that up far longer than a lion can. But over short sprints, a lion can probably get hold of a springbok. Also, one lonely impala, sort of just exiting the screen to the right there. Nice to have a bit of variety here in Okakoyo as well. Now, the impala and the springbok look pretty similar, but they're actually not that closely related at all. The springbok's nearest relative in the wild is actually the gerenuk, which, if you don't know what that is certainly worth a Google. And you can spell it Gerenuk, gerenuk. And they occur in places like East Africa. You might actually get them on Old Donyo. Oh, they're weird-looking things. Able to stand up on their hind legs and use their very giraffe-like body structure to feed on branches and leaves. It's all happening at the waterholes this morning. There is life everywhere. The springbok is another phenomenally well desert-adapted species. They can go long stretches without access to water, days moving into even weeks at times. But of course, if water is available, they will flock to it. Incredible if you think that a human being lost in a wilderness like this would probably be dead in 2 or 3 days without access to drinking water. We have become so weak. But I guess animals have had time to adjust to these environments and to evolve all the necessary adaptations to survive. Now you'll see that springbok almost up to chest height in the water there. You might be thinking, oh, this thing is about to get munched by a croc. But thankfully for him or her, no crocs here in Okakoyo. It's just a little bit too arid for them. No crocs and no hippos. There's just not enough grass for the hippo to survive. But there's a lot of other danger out there. This is pretty perfect habitat for the cheetah, which is one of the biggest enemies of the springbok. And, again, capable of running even faster. Again, springbok about 88 kilometers an hour, but cheetah have been measured at over 100 kilometers an hour on the sprint. Fastest mammal on land. They just can't keep it up for very long. So provided the springbok gets a bit of a head start, it will outrun that predator. Looks pretty windy out here. See that haze and dust coming through. Certainly not an easy environment in which to make a living. It looks like the surface of another planet. But nature, in all of its varied, highly adapted forms, will always find a way. A little food, a little water, animals make a plan. This really is quite a haven for the springbok. At one stage, Southern Africa was home to millions and millions more. But obviously our human population has grown so much in the last 100 odd years There just aren't so many places left for these springbok and many other things. In a particular drought in 1849, a single group of over 1 million springbok, really struggling in the drought, left the Kalahari Desert, which is also here in southern Africa, a little bit further east of the Kalahari here. And they wandered into the town of Beaufort West, searching for water and food. You can imagine what carnage that would have been. I believe people shot them in their tens of thousands. Yeah, it's miraculous there are any left. But in a place like Etosha, people don't do any hunting. The springbok are left to live out their lives naturally. You can actually see those gusts of wind hitting the water. Those are those sort of darker patches. And the wildlife seems to be clearing a little bit. Epic to hear the vocalizations of those springbok, the funny little grunts. Yeah, animals are not the hugest fan of wind. It tends to mess with their senses, decrease their ability to detect predators. But I'm sure these guys will be coming in dribs and drabs through the day. Oh yeah, it's definitely getting windy out here. You can see the branches of that camel thorn tree. So I think we might leave our fairly windswept scene here in Okakoyo for a little bit. Let's check back in with Jamala, see what's happening out there. Ha ha ha! A big herd of eddies, a breeding herd here in Jamala in South Africa's Madikwe Game Reserve. And the ellies in this area have a really nice tinge to them. They've got sort of this reddish skin. Their skin is the same as the ellies in Madikwe, in Djuma, in Oldonyo, in Djuma, and everywhere else. It's actually just kind of an illusion produced by the red soil in the area. They obviously love to dust bath, to roll in the mud. It tends to coat them in the earth of the place in which they live. Very, very nice. Again, an elephant breeding herd, probably the most structured family unit in nature. All centered around the matriarch, almost certainly the grandmother of the group, the oldest, most experienced female. She's possibly that tuskless cow on the left there. And this will be a collection of her sisters and all of their offspring. A female born into this group will be in the herd for the rest of her life. But as we touched on at Old Donyo, males leave roughly as soon as they're in puberty, somewhere between 15 and about 20 years of age, depending on how well behaved they are. If they get boisterous very young and aggressive very young, then they've got to go. And the cows will make sure of that. Their biggest priority is protecting their latest calves. And these breeding herds can get massive. I've seen herds in the Greater Kruger in excess of 40 individuals in one family. Seriously special stuff. And occasionally around water, you can get hundreds. On a stint at Pridelands a number of weeks ago, we had over 300 elephants around Ndlovu Dam, all at once. That's pretty magical stuff. And of all the wildlife we deal with at our various locations, the elephant is my favorite. I can spend hours watching ellies. Not a whole lot of drinking going on here. I think these ellies are mostly pulling up things like grass roots. It's perhaps also just nice for them to be hanging out in the sun. Again, things get pretty frosty in places like Madikwe in South Africa's northwest at this time of the year. Temperatures definitely down into the single digits at night. That is chilly. A couple of them may be moving down to the water though. Yeah, I think a little drinking starting over there, definitely. All of this dry, fibrous vegetation has to be moistened so that these ellies can digest it. And that clicking call you're hearing in the background almost certainly belongs to a crimson-breasted shrike, one of South Africa's or Southern Africa's most attractive-looking birds. They have this blood red breast, a lovely dark back, white stripes, pretty dramatic looking. If you haven't seen one before, have a look on my Instagram. You'll find a cool pic there, a little bit further back. What a dust bowl. Really serene scene. Elephants just going about their business as they have done for thousands of years in Africa. How long may they live? They are big, very sensitive, very emotional creatures that have pretty immense needs to match their immense bodies. Now, one of their biggest needs is space. So, enormous reserves like Madikwe are perfect for them. Ideally, they need to move over thousands of kilometers a year, even with little calves in tow, in order to follow the rains and to find fresh grazing. Now, there are many scientists that reckon that before humans got to Africa, or rather Europeans, um elephants wandered literally between countries that didn't exist at the time. But obviously, in those days, there were no tar roads, no human settlements to stop them, no border fences. Still, though, there are some immense wilderness areas where these elephants thrive, and this is one of them. The Ellie's here doing very well indeed. Our ever-present herd of wildebeest as well, also still present in the background. This is actually quite a nice spot for them. They do tend to prefer open areas. With their eyesight adapted the way it has been for life on the plains, spending time in thickets seems to make them quite uncomfortable. I think they're much less capable of spotting something like a lurking lion in dense bush as they are out in the open. There's also, of course, a fairly permanent source of water here. And as I've said a couple of times already, water is life. Tis dusty and dry, though. Um, Simpiwe, it certainly can. It's been well documented in a number of areas. I believe Tembe Elephant Park in South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal province as well as Amboseli up in East Africa. Eddies have been viewed on a number of occasions with twin babies, but it's far less common than it is with people. I think also having to share the space in the womb, those babies are so big already. If they are born as twins, coming out slightly smaller, any sort of reduction in size is a big disadvantage for wildlife. I think survival rates are probably not the highest when babies are born in pairs. But yeah, having said that, elephant mums make such great mothers that they've got every chance of making it. She's certainly going to defend them with her life. That fact actually makes a female elephant one of the most dangerous things on the planet, especially for people on foot. Guiding walking safaris, you avoid elephant cows like the plague. Now, one of the only factors that you can use to your advantage is that an elephant can't jump. So, provided you can get behind a big fallen over log or perhaps even into a steep drainage line or something, provided she can't reach you with her trunk, she probably won't be able to get to you. But she can run a lot faster than a human can, and even if you try and climb up into a tree, she can probably reach about 4 or 5 meters up. So tangle with Ellie cows at your peril. So elephant numbers in Africa at the moment sit somewhere around 350,000. But experts studying population trends over the last couple of decades reckon that in the last 50 years, we may have lost as many as 60% of Africa's ellies. I think that's pretty devastating. One of the biggest factors affecting the ellies is a rapidly increasing human population. I suppose that's an issue facing the entire planet. Human population growth everywhere. It's just very, very, very difficult for people to share the same area as elephants, especially in very rural Africa where people are subsistence farming, trying to grow crops. There's not a whole lot that will stop an elephant that's keen to eat some maize or eat some pumpkins. Ultimately, if a human family's survival depends on those crops, you're going to be pretty devastated if an elephant comes in and eats the entire lot in one night, which is quite possible. They can eat hundreds of kilos in a sitting. So yeah, we have to try and find a balance between what elephants need and the needs of people as well. A healthy coexistence. An incredible conservation group in the Lowveld, Elephants Alive, has found a pretty dynamic solution using beehives. So they are relying on the fact that ellies are quite scared of the African honeybee. And the belief is that the bees pose quite a danger to ellies. A sting somewhere around the trunk would almost certainly affect that elephant's ability to breathe. So anyway, Elephants Alive provides bee boxes, beehives, which are suspended on long wires, long strands all the way around fields. The bees establish quite quickly. They obviously pollinate the crops, which is great, keep the ellies out. And with a bit of training, the owners of those farms can then even harvest that wonderful organic honey and sell it for a bit of extra income. Everybody's happy, and the ellies can find food elsewhere. There are often interesting solutions using nature to our benefit that that don't require the sort of fatal reactions. We don't have to shoot things. Keeps everyone happy. Thanks, Julie. Glad to hear you found it informative, and I agree completely. What an exciting morning it's been. That's the beauty of having the ability to switch between a couple of different locations, thanks to Africam and WildEarth. Variety is the spice of life. Interesting to note that a couple of these adult females are tuskless cows. That's a recessive gene. The tusks haven't been removed or anything like that. They just never developed. Yeah, it seems to be quite common in this population of elephant at Madikwe. And they've passed that recessive gene down to a number of these calves. Tusks start growing fairly young. You start to see them in young elephant calves, probably between the age of 1 and 2, somewhere there. So this individual center screen is also definitely tuskless. She will never grow ivory teeth. In conflict zones in which elephants are poached, and that may be quite beneficial to their survival. The tusks are useful. They use them to dig, to defend themselves, to strip bark. But with tusks absent, if there is rampant ivory poaching, as there is in some areas, and those ellies would be at lower risk of being shot. Total peace. I love how these ellies just stand. They sort of take a load off, lifting the weight off of one of their legs. Completely relaxed. A lot of people on safari find elephants quite daunting, and understandably so. They can even block out the sun when they're close enough to the car. But once you've learned to check out a bit of elephant body language, see what they're doing with their tails, the way they're holding their heads, and the body language can be extremely indicative of what that elephant intends to do. Now, they do always have a slight side of unpredictability, but if you are kind of tuned into what they're doing, how they're feeling, you can operate quite safely around them, often at very close quarters. If you're a nice ethical naturalist, giving them respect, giving them lots of room, often they choose to come to you. And it can lead to some pretty meaningful encounters. I've had people on safari multiple times moved to tears looking into an elephant's eyes, especially only a meter or so away. They are big, soulful animals with lots of emotion. I think it's one of the things that makes me love them so much. And once you've viewed elephants like this out in nature, roaming as they should be, connecting with other elephants, connecting with members of their family, you will look very differently upon elephants kept in captivity. In particular, it is kept alone in zoos. For an animal that is by definition, only an elephant if it's connected with other ellies. Being locked in captivity all alone has got to be a fate worse than death. They don't belong in zoos. Zoos definitely have a purpose, certainly for the breeding of a couple of endangered species, endangered birds, endangered reptiles, amphibians, fish, as well as some small mammals, certain big cats. But for big, intelligent animals like this, as well as great whales, killer whales, things like that, dolphins, porpoises, and big primates, I think captivity isn't a great life. And I think pressure needs to be kept on zoos to stop the breeding of elephants in captivity. So the ellies that exist there now can live out their lives, but so that we're not dealing with captive ellies, captive whales going into the future. Sorry, MC, your comms broke a little bit there. Would you mind going again? So I think with about 10 minutes left of the show, let's check back in with old Donyo, see what's happening up there. And the scene continues out here. Beautiful, it just doesn't get old. Elephant, oryx, zebra, and giraffe, all in the same frame. And sharing a very, very tight little area around this pan. Check out all those different colors, all those patterns. This is Africa. The dazzling nature of those zebra stripes, especially with multiple zebra all sort of moving in very close quarters to one another, is reckoned to be the evolutionary purpose of those markings. It is no coincidence that a group of zebra is occasionally referred to as a dazzle. It creates quite a dazzling, confusing effect. The theory being that something like a lion charging towards a group of zebra which are thundering off in the opposite direction will have a lot of difficulty focusing on an individual in that tangled mess of hooves and stripes and bouncing bodies. And without the ability to focus its predatory efforts on one individual, it may be quite unsuccessful on the hunt. That natural theory was actually used in Churchillian England in the development of destroyer ships in the Second World War. One prototype was painted in black and white, these sort of very abstract Picasso-type black and white markings, for the theory that it would be very, very difficult to fire upon with a gun from a sort of quite a distance. I don't know, it was a very good idea. I don't think it ever really took off, but nice to see some inspiration coming from the natural world. There are lots of answers to our problems in nature. Nature's essentially had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to figure these things out. giraffe coming in droves now. I think there's eight that we can see in frame there, 7 or 8. Dozens of oryx, still a couple of these zebra. And of course, that wonderful, impressive elephant bull. He's got a very unique rip in his right ear there, possibly caused by a tusk from another elephant or the vegetation, and that will never heal. A bit like a fingerprint, it'll identify him forever. This place is absolutely chock-a-block with life. It makes for some pretty stunning viewing. What a frame. It actually looks a bit like a painting. It's just too good to be true. Also, one of the wonderful things about viewing these various waterholes with these kind of remote activated cameras, these dam cams, is you take the human element out of it. We are naturally quite a frightening presence to most of the wildlife. The fact that there are no humans present in these scenes, having to do filming or move vehicles, or even just the presence of human scent, it leaves us with some really natural animal behavior. We're almost like a fly on the wall. Goodness me, look at all these giraffes. Thanks very much for the kind words there, Spas. And the feeling is mutual. It's made my day as well. Be sure to tune in again. Again, these Live at the Waterhole shows taking place every single day. So check in with what's happening around these magnificent waterholes. That's a giraffe bull at the back there, sniffing around the back end of a giraffe cow. If she is receptive, she'll actually pee a little bit, which I think is what she's doing. If he is so inclined, he'll take a sip of that urine, which might be a little bit gross to you or me. He'll curl his lip, exposing an olfactory sensory organ in the roof of his mouth. It's called the organ of Jacobson's. Humans actually have a vestige of it where it used to be. And that'll give him the ability, as the bull, to test her urine for elevated estrogen levels. Those levels will be at their highest around ovulation, around the time an egg is released by her ovaries, at which time he knows she's pretty receptive to mating. But yeah, he moved out of there pretty quickly, so I think the answer was probably no. So in about 60 seconds, we will be wrapping up the Live at the Waterhole show for the morning. So from our entire team here at WildEarth, as well as Africam, and from myself, naturalist Liam Burrow, it's been an absolute pleasure. Looking forward to being back live with you again soon. But be sure to tune in for the Sunset Safari coming up a little bit later this afternoon. And certainly a lot more action on these phenomenal waterholes. Hope wherever you are, you're having a lovely day. From all of us, a good day and goodbye. Thanks again.